I'm so delighted and excited to be here with all of you today. You'll watch me drink water and swig cough syrup. You can smell and find out it's just cough syrup because I got stricken with whatever that viral thing is on Tuesday, and on Wednesday I missed the first day of teaching class ever in my life in 32 years of teaching. So I was down for the count, and yesterday I was going, I don't have a voice, so I might squeak in and out a little bit. Minnie Mouse-like, it'll go really high. Feel free to laugh, it's fairly entertaining. And then it'll go really low, like I'm in the back of a tavern smoking 5 packs of Marlboros. So, you know, it's one of those glorious moments. I thought, this is great, it's gonna be streamed and recorded. That's fabulous, right? just what somebody wants. I want to give you a little background of how I came to be here in front of you. My PhD dissertation was on the Learning Alliance and the variables that create a flourishing learning alliance in the classroom between students, faculty, and the curriculum. And like many dissertations, it ate my head for a year and a half, and it taught me a lot about the right dynamics of safety and challenge in the classroom, and mixing those variables up in the safety so students could take on challenges, upping the challenges so students could be stretched and learn and grow. And so this piece on developmental trauma is an extension of that earlier work. And how I came to sort of trip over this topic is I teach in the Women in Transition program at Lane, which in the 80s, it was called the Displaced Homemakers Program, like they were standing out in fields somewhere, and we needed to get them somewhere. And I've been involved with that program for 29 and a half of the 30 years it's been in existence. We just had our 30th year celebration, so I sort of grew up with the program. And along the way, the women have continued to inform us of what they need in the classroom setting, and what they need to be able to persist and establish degree attainment, all those pieces. And about 2 years ago, we started talking about shock trauma in class. And a huge number of the women indicated that they'd had and experienced shock trauma. Things like physical violence, sexual assault, shootings, natural disasters, things like that. But when I explained to them the concept of developmental trauma, which is largely what we're going to go over today, and asked them how many of them had experienced developmental trauma, all 28 said yes. And I started having those discussions in other classes that weren't part of the program, and males and females were indicating that they had disruptions that dated back to developmental trauma. I got a seed grant from the Wayne Morris Law Center last February to develop experimental curriculum to teach a class of women in transition students the theory of developmental trauma, how to identify it, how to look at their own disruptions, places where they're activated, and how to enact positive resources and find ways to advocate for themselves in their learning process. There's going to be a panel of those students this afternoon after lunch at 1, where we'll be able to hear their insights and experiences, and they have so much to inform us about. And they all did a learning plan as a final project in the class fall term, and it was beautiful work. Like, I have goosebumps right now, and there's a copy of the learning plan handout that they worked on. And it's just such exquisite work. When I asked 2 years ago the group of women in transition students to do a free write on how developmental trauma had impacted them and their insights, the things they said were extraordinary. I'll give you a couple examples. What they said to me was that they felt like displaced learners, that they felt apart from the learning process that they witnessed other students engaging in, that something was different or broken in them, that the harder they had to try, the worse they felt about themselves. And that piece broke my heart, because I saw how hard they were efforting. And if you think of that experience, for a lot of us, the harder we try, the more success we achieve. And to have that inverse piece of the harder you try, the worse you feel about yourself, because it must mean something's missing or wrong, right? They shared with me that they felt the word triggered, which we often use with trauma, was actually triggering itself because it sounded like it was something happening to them that they didn't have control over. And so they taught me the notion of using the word activated, that their central nervous system was activated, because that implied they had the power to deactivate it. And I thought that was such rich wisdom. And they came up with this wonderfully neutral word, disruption, to indicate for themselves a disruption or an interruption in the learning process that had no blame, that wasn't about faculty not doing the right thing, that wasn't about them somehow being wrong, but to look at the disruptions and figure out how to get back in the learning flow. When I asked them what it would be like if the barriers from developmental trauma were significantly diminished, they said that they'd be able to feel successful and be successful. And that was a piece that felt out of reach, right? And my group of women aren't the only students on campus that feel that way. They said that they would be able to believe that more was possible for them, that attaining dreams and goals weren't just for other people, but for themselves as well. And so those are some of the things that developmental trauma causes people to feel lost from, apart from. When we did this developmental trauma class in the fall, it was brand new curriculum. And I'm always developing curriculum, but my newest curriculum that I've got going, I've been teaching for 5 years. So doing something so brand new with material that I wasn't very familiar with was quite a journey. You'll hear from those students. They were so brave. They could have done a mutiny on me at several points in the term because I made it worse before I made it better. And I always say that I learn what not to do by screwing up and doing it. So we had a very transparent learning process, and a chunk of what I'm going to present today in a really condensed form, we spent 11 weeks and 33 hours on, and it was still super intense. I would go home after teaching class and just lay down, face down on the couch with my coat still on and my car keys, because it was quite a journey. I say that to all of you because the information is a little content dense, and there's not really a way around it. And some of us in this room have developmental trauma. So as I'm talking about it, if you notice any kind of activation going on, like yikes, or you're thinking about a loved one that you recognize in this process, most people have a little bit of developmental trauma. And developmental trauma, I'm going to go into all the theory and foundational stuff behind it, but developmental trauma tends to be more of the incremental pieces of neglect, misattunements, disruptions in connection, and you can come out of a perfectly lovely family, and those things can be disrupted due to parental illness, poverty. One of the things I think we're going to be looking at in the next 10 years is connection is such a vital part of core biological needs being met, and when adequate connection isn't found in the parenting-child relationship, there is developmental trauma. And the more time little kids spend looking at screens, we're going to have the next generation showing up with a ton of connection trauma. Through no negative act, we're going to see a ton of that. And so I think it's really germane that we're starting this conversation and collaboration now, because we're going to need to have many conversations as our next generation of college students becomes college ready and shows up in front of us. And it's going to create new challenges in the classroom, because a lot of them are not going to be comfortable and used to face-to-face interactions, because their interactions happen on their screen. So we're going to need to get creative and new in different ways. So before I get started, I would love to hear briefly who you are, what college you represent, and what department you're from, so we can just get a feel of who's in the room. Could we start? Whatever you want to do. Let me give you the mic. You can just pass this around.
Good morning. I'm Jeff Davis. I'm the Regional Director for Benton County for Lynn Benton Community College, and I'm so happy to be back here because I was at Lane for 5 years leading up to the design and building of this great venue.
Hi, I'm Susan Anderson. I'm teaching one class at Umpqua Community College in Roseburg. a writing class.
I'm Kendall Baker, and I'm with the Mental Health and Counseling Department at Umpqua Community College as well.
I'm Lindsay Murphy, and I'm also at Umpqua Community College in the Mental Health Department.
Good morning. My name is Danielle Haskett. I am at Umpqua Community College as well, and I work in accessibility services.
Jan Woodcock, Umpqua Community College. I teach human services, crisis intervention.
I'm Erin Bartley. I teach English at Lane.
My name is Jackie Owens. I teach in the Adult Basic and Secondary Ed department at Lane.
I'm Karen Crumry. I'm the lead faculty at Department of Speech and Communication Studies at Lane.
I'm Christina Salter, and I coordinate the Human Services program at Lane Community College.
Hi, I'm Michelle Barber, and I'm the counselor for the Center for Accessible Resources at Lane.
I'm Brenda Williams. I'm the advisor and faculty for High School Connections at Lane.
Yeah.
That's a hot mic. Nobody wants to hold it.
My name is Robert Gilly. I teach reading and study skills at Chemeketa.
Hi, I'm Alyssa Hatman, and I teach developmental writing at Chemeketa Community College.
Good morning. I'm Laura Scott, and I also teach developmental writing at Chemeketa.
I'm Carrie Beavert, and I teach reading and study skills at Chemeketa.
Good morning. I'm Laylee Liss, and I also teach reading and study skills and developmental writing at Chemeketa.
And I'm Jennifer Saduk, and I'm also in reading and study skills at Chemeketa.
Hello. Hi, I'm Guadalupe Aragon, and I teach the smoking/nicotine cessation class at Portland Community College.
Hello, I'm Jenny Christian. I teach the same classes at PCC Sylvania that Kara does here.
My name is Stacy Vasquez. I am a Women in Transition graduate, and I'm also the VA certifying official at Lane Community College.
Good morning, Dr. Joan Sinclair, lead accounting faculty at Clackamas Community College, and I'm bringing back this information for a lot of eager faculty there.
Nice.
Good morning. I'm Mindy Stokes. I'm adjunct faculty at Clatsop Community College. I teach women's studies, and I've taught for years in the Lives in Transition program, using your book that I hope you signed today.
Oh, yeah. It's a well-loved book, I can tell.
The best book. I'm Rinda Johansson. I am an LIT graduate, and I'm the program resource person from Clatsop Community College LIT program.
And my name's Shelley Alford, and I teach 2 classes in the Lives in Transition program at Clatsop Community College also. And I also have your book, and it's been well used.
Look at that. Its spine is hanging on, barely.
Hi, I'm Mary Babcock, and I teach ABE GED at Lynn Benton Community College.
I'm Kelly Wallner, and I also teach GED at Lynn Benton Community College.
My name is Kimberly Jensen. I tutor and adjunct teach mathematics at Chemeketa Community College. Lots of trauma around math.
Yes, yes.
Hey, good morning. I'm Corey Hall Martin, and I'm finishing up my master's degree in social work at Portland State University, and I'm currently interning at Portland Community College.
Hi, I'm Kim Martin, and I'm a counselor from Chemeketa Community College. I teach a Creating College Success course as well.
My name is Clea Alvarez, and I'm a counselor at Chemeketa.
I'm Kathy Martell Straight, and I'm an academic advisor at Chemeketa and adjunct teach the college success and career and life development.
Good morning. My name is Blanca Aguirre, and I'm a counselor at Chemeketa as well. And I also teach first-year experience and career life development as well.
My name is Jennifer Leantrip. I'm a reference librarian at Umpqua Community College.
Hi, I'm Georgianne Willis. I teach psychology at Umpqua Community College.
Emery Smith, and I'm the sociology department at Umpqua.
Good morning, I'm Kate Morgan, and I'm a counselor and advisor at Lynn Benton Community College.
Hi, I'm Carol Lee, and I teach math at Portland Community College.
Hi, Minu Marashi. I also teach math at Portland Community College part-time.
I'm Chris Fink. I teach writing at Portland Community College, and I want to give a shout out to the two men in the room.
Hi, my name is Jessica Bobrowski, and I am a WIT graduate, and I was part of this exciting course, and I'm going to be on the student panel later. And I'm an LCC graduate now, too.
Did we get you two? Okay. So what a wonderful cross-section of folks we have in here from various colleges. It was so nice to hear all that. Thank you so much. And you know, writing, math, and a lot of developmental study skills, things which doesn't that make sense we're all in the same room together, because in my imagined universe, you know, I've got probably about another 4 years before I retire, because I've been teaching at the college level since 1978, illegally as a 21-year-old, while my professor I was TAing for was working on his golf game, because higher ed was totally different back then. That was pre-Measure 5, when you could get away with that kind of stuff. One of my fantasy visions is that this sort of developmental trauma collaboration that we're all creating greatly reduces the need for developmental ed classes. Because I think if we can get students to understand the nature of developmental trauma, help them access their frontal cortex where they're available for learning and memory and problem solving and creativity, we're going to see them move through those skill building classes much faster. And I think if we're purposeful about that and we start the conversation and claim the conversation and move those theories forward in our classrooms, we have the opportunity in the unique group that we are to have a trickle-down effect in other courses and other disciplines that don't naturally have these concerns at the forefront, right? So what I want us to do today is consider this conversation the first of many. I am this much familiar with the topic. I started really delving into it 15 months ago, and what I would advise is do not spend your summer power reading 40 books on trauma, because it's a little traumatizing. So I had to start interspersing it with old Mr. Wizard cartoons and things from my childhood that just were safe, that I knew what I was going to read next, because I would be reading these books and I'd be going, yikes, right? And I'm going to try to condense the best of that for us here today. So let's get started. So as I was saying earlier, talking to the women in transition students, and we all know this as educators, that language and word choice matters, but it matters especially when we're looking at developmental trauma. And our student panel is going to have so much to share this afternoon about helpful behaviors that faculty can engage in, the things that tend to create disruptions for them, things as simple as tone of voice. And if someone has a loud voice, which to a student without developmental trauma might just seem like, oh, that person has a big voice. For somebody with developmental trauma, that's enough to get them out of their chair and into the hall. The energy of the person, you know, where's the person's sort of energy level? Is it positive? Is it warm? All those basic things that we know matters so much more to somebody with developmental trauma, because they're always scanning for, are they emotionally safe in that setting? So the more we can find our bandwidth that seems to set the tone for our students, that they're comfortable, that they're safe, that we're going to be consistent in our approach, in our stance in the classroom, and basic things like, if we're walking around the classroom, to not ever stop behind a student and hover. because for people with developmental trauma, as well as people with shock trauma, that hovering adjacency sends up the threat signal and puts people into the more primitive part of their brains. Things as basic as that. And just learning to approach people directly on. Things like that. So we'll be talking more about this afternoon. Let's start taking a look at some of the theory behind developmental trauma. So this first table that you're looking at, the acronym NARM stands for Neuroaffective Relational, what's the M? I always forget the M. I'll tell you later. Jessica, what's model, that's what it is. Of course, that would be why I can't remember it. So neuroaffective relational model, right? So from this theory, they look at 5 basic core biological needs for a child to experience in a positive way so that they can have a healthy, full sense of aliveness and connection and creativity in the world, right? And when parenting is reasonably adequate, most of these 5 biological needs are in place, and it allows for adults to be creative, to pursue the things that matter most to them, to have healthy relationships. If you look at the first core need, connection, the core capacities essential to well-being. In other words, that what the child needs to accomplish, the capacity to be in touch with our bodies and our emotions, the capacity to be in connection with others, and I would add to that the capacity to be in connection with yourself, to be able to stay present to yourself in uncomfortable situations, to not split off or exit your experience. And think about this in relation to the learning process, for the student to be able to stay in connection to the material, to the curriculum, to be able to not pull away when something's challenging or hard. And that's the first foundational core biological need. And if that need is disrupted, if that need isn't met, abilities are going to be radically compromised. And we see that in our students. We see our students sometimes have a hard time coming to class regularly or coming to office hours or making connections with other students. The women in the fall class talked, and they'll talk some this afternoon, about the challenge of being put in small groups that were not of their choosing, right? And prior to teaching in the Women in Transition program, I taught at the U of O for many years in much more sort of classically traditional classes. I have a bachelor's in literature and a master's in telecommunication and film, and so I taught video production and other things. And it wasn't until I got in the Women in Transition program that I had to get so much more mindful about it is a big deal to put people in small groups that aren't of their own choosing. So in our program, the classroom has tables that are octagon, and after about the second week, as is common in most classrooms, people figure out where they want to sit and who they want to sit by, and then I have those be the small groups, because people can choose where they want to be and deepen their connection if they choose to. Attunement, that's the capacity to attune to our needs and emotions. So to be able to stay with those emotions, I always think of attunement as not adding or subtracting anything from the experience. So if I'm attuning to Jessica in the back room and she's explaining a dilemma to me, I'm not adding to that by giving my own experience. I'm not subtracting from it by trying to say, well, you know, you'll be fine, here's an idea. I just stay with that experience. And we all know what that is. But for our students who are coming out of developmental trauma, attunement is a miracle and something that also can make them unravel like a cheap sweater, because they're so hungry for it and hungry to be seen. But then when they feel fully seen, that creates all of this reunion grief for what they didn't have. So there's always this push-pull going on in these factors. It's also the capacity to recognize, reach out for, and take in physical and emotional nourishment. One of the challenges sometimes for me in the Women in Transition program is it's hard for me to know what my students need, because there's this inhibition to reaching out, to saying, hey, Kara, I need some clarification on what we just did, or can I come to your office hour and will you explain that to me? Because often they're out of attunement from what they really need and they don't even know what's missing or what to ask for. trust, the capacity for healthy dependence and interdependence. So imagine that mix in the classroom where they can function sort of depending on the curriculum to move them forward and be interdependent with other students and with faculty. And if that's in place, there's a lot of resources available on college campuses for students. But if it's not, students aren't going to approach those resources because they don't trust those connections that would come out of the resources. So it leaves them isolated. Autonomy, the capacity to set appropriate boundaries, the capacity to say no and set limits, capacity to speak our mind without guilt or fear. We'll see in a while, especially the capacity to set appropriate boundaries. When that's not in place, our students that have developmental trauma have their boundaries external, meaning if they can't say, wow, Kara, this is a little overwhelming, this amount of material, can you go back and explain that? If they can't set a boundary and speak their mind, they're much more likely to have their boundary be, I won't come back from break, I'll just go home. They will set a physical, withdrawing, disappearing boundary. And what can look like, flaky student behavior oftentimes is not knowing how to set a boundary so they can stay present in the classroom. One of the things I do with my students right up front as part of our classroom culture is I tell them anytime they need to get up and stand at the back of the room, walk out of the room, that they are welcome to come and go as much as they need. That way they can still use their self-limiting trait of physically creating that boundary, but they're still within the hub of the classroom. And they get to come and go and experience that ambivalence and find out that there's safety and acceptance for that, and they learn to start to self-modulate. And as they go through the second and third levels of the program, I see less and less and less of that because they figure out how to stay, which is what we want for our students. We want them to figure out how to be able to stay in the learning process. Love, sexuality, we're not going to really obviously go there as it relates to the learning process because it's important to have some boundaries, but I wanted you to see the whole model. It's the capacity to live with an open heart, the capacity to integrate a loving relationship with a vital sexuality. So this is if childhood goes pretty well, which is a pretty lovely list of attributes and places to be. And as I said earlier, most of us have at least minor disruptions in those areas, and that's normal. And one of my other roles is I'm a psychologist in private practice, and the fact that people have mild disruptions in this area is job security for me, so don't feel bad about it. And the more you think you have disruptions in areas, probably the less likely it is, because a lot of folks, the folks who think they're boring usually aren't, and the people that are sure they're fine sometimes aren't. So if you're looking at that going, uh-oh, yikes, don't worry, because we're all in the same boat. So we just saw the five core biological needs and what it looks like if things go well. If things don't go well in the first 10 years of childhood and there's disruptions to each of the styles, they become survival styles, which is what we're looking at now. So if a child in the early years of life doesn't get enough connection, enough one-on-one FaceTime interaction, you'll see a disruption in the connection style, and it turns into the connection survival style. And then as we look at these core difficulties, I'd really like you to keep considering how do those pertain to what we see in the classroom with our students? How do those pertain to the difficulties? And the first time I read this, after I read this chart, I was sitting in my backyard in a chair. I put the book face down on the patio table and I just laid down in the yard because I thought, I wish as educators we had this information earlier. You know, it just gets to it because I'm thinking how much we could do for our students off of this. So for the connection style, the core difficulty, disconnected from physical and emotional self, difficulty relating to others. Imagine that in the educational setting. If you can't relate to others, whether it's faculty, students, staff, going in the library scares you, all those things, how do you access any resources? How do you relate to yourself? How do you learn from a disconnected place? You know, I would assert that you don't, and that's part of the discouragement. I left this typo in there on purpose because Jessica, in her wonderful graphic arts career now, has volunteered to do things for the program in a beautiful way. And I was having her schlepp around and move the slides around very late on Wednesday, and the spell check doesn't recognize the word attunement, so it kept switching it to atonement on her, and which I left because I want to atone to you for having you up till 3 a.m. Wednesday morning. So I left it because it felt appropriate. But for our purposes, you know, when someone's so lovely that they cheerfully say yes when you know they wanted to be asleep 4 hours earlier. So for our purposes, now that I've made my atonement, it really is the attunement style. And what we're experiencing in here is one of the little tidbits I've learned to do in the classroom, and I'm sure many of you have, which is show my goof-ups, show my imperfections, and model self-acceptance. Because self-esteem for me isn't just liking attributes myself, it's not being at war with the things that aren't at the level that I want them to be at. So I out myself to them and tell them that I have 2 really significant learning disabilities and a really significant head injury. Sometimes you'll hear me stammer and stuff. I got run over by a hit-and-run drunk driver when I was 26 in grad school and left for dead. And back then, insurance did not have to treat you in those days. And so I didn't know I had a head injury until several years later. And so it affects my speech center. I'm not uncomfortable with you. I just say to them, you know, I stammer and stutter. I also can't spell above a 5th grade level. And so when spell check happened, it was like the sky opened up and the angels went, oh, because I can get close. And my computer says, do you mean this? I go, yeah, of course. I thought that's what I was typing. And I'm mathematically dyslexic. So I could never be a Time Life operator taking your credit card number because somebody else would get charged for it. I have all kinds of career limitations. But when they hear that, even if they can't connect to themselves, they can connect to my story of my limitations and my flaws that I'm at peace with. And it allows them to kind of go, maybe I don't have to be self-rejecting about that. And if Kara made it through college, and she's got all these things and just, you know, a whacked out brain, you know, and I'll share with them things like, for something to go into my long-term memory, I usually have to see it, hear it, experience it 24 times or so. And if I'm under stress, that might double. And they all look at me like, well, I wouldn't need to hear it 24 to 48 times. I said, you'll function much faster in this classroom. And when they get that you can have these blocks and barriers and still have an educational process that works, that you come out the other side, it settles them down in a big way. So looking at the attunement, no longer atonement style, difficulty knowing what we need and feeling our needs do not deserve to be met. In my early days in the Women in Transition program, I could never figure out why no one utilized my office hours. Because at the U of O, there's a pretty good stream of people in. And people weren't seeking me out at my office hours because they were in that survival style of either, I don't know what I need, so what's the point of going to the office hour? Or, I don't deserve this, I'm just going to take up Kara's time, she's got better things to do. So I had to get creative about how to make myself accessible to students. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in the morning, but I had to get really wily about it and kind of do some luring feral cats in energy. You know, I'm a big person for feral cats, but I'm the vortex of that. So I started using some of those techniques of feral cats and their wariness and being kind of distracted but adjacent and letting a conversation come up. Trust survival style, feeling we cannot depend on anyone but ourselves. These folks hate group projects. They would rather do the project by themselves, right? And feeling we always have to be in control. So sometimes that'll be the student in class that has a more right answer than the one you're expressing or sharing in class, they need to bring up the yes but, because part of how they feel in control is by feeling they've got more knowledge, they've got greater knowledge. You see some of that in the autonomy survival style as well. The autonomy survival style, feeling burdened and pressured. These are the students who often present as depressed and fatigued and worn out, because that is their experience. And difficulty setting limits and saying no directly. So sometimes with their co-students, someone will say, hey, will you study with me? Can you help me with this project? And they will, because they have a hard time setting limits and saying no. So to us as faculty, they may look like super high-functioning students, like they can take care of themselves and they're the support person for other students. And sometimes that's the case, but sometimes it's somebody who's actually in developmental trauma, and we need to pay attention to what might be under the surface, because they may have needs that we would never guess at in a million years because of the way they present. And a lot of our students with these adaptive survival styles are primarily really good students that suffer so much inside. So you can't tell looking at GPAs. When you hear from our panel today, they've got exceptional GPAs, and that doesn't speak to the self-doubt, the suffering, and the fact that they can be doing super well, and then one of these survival styles gets activated by something that's going on in the educational environment, and we see performance really fall off, and it doesn't make sense to them or us. The love sexuality survival style, difficulty integrating heart and sexuality, self-esteem based on looks and performance. Okay, I want to pause here and see if people have any questions or comments as we're going through this.
What does the A stand for in NURBS?
Affective. In other words, like it's sort of the brain emotional overlapping. Yeah.
So your statement earlier that if and when students understand developmental trauma. I love what you said earlier about if and when students understand developmental trauma, they move through developmental curriculum quicker. That's lovely, and it's bold. Does that tie back to research?
No, and that's what I'm excited to see if we can figure out how to do. It's my hunch. It's my hunch. Because what I've seen is before the Women in Transition program that I'm in, I added 2 second layers to it because apparently I don't need a personal life. And the second layer is looking at peeling off the onion and peeling off all the behaviors and ways of thinking and being that get in the way of people being their flourishing selves. And it's a lot of different ways to think about things. I spent most of 2015 writing the book on that, and it's little pieces about things like stop waiting for motivation, because motivation's a feeling, and when it's there, it's lovely because it's extra go power, but I actually don't believe in motivation. I believe in making decisions and just sticking with a decision, whether it feels good or not, and behaving my way to success, because my head injury was significant enough, I lost all ability to be motivated. And I had to figure out how to operate in the world with no motivation. And at first I went, I don't feel like doing anything. And everyone, when it's depression, I said, no, I just can't, wherever that motivation reward center in my brain, it's gone, right? Which makes it really easy not to overeat. That's the payoff, okay? So it's not the worst thing, there's the upside. But to be able to find that natural motivation or drive was absent. With people in developmental trauma, that comes and goes depending on whether they're activated, and they don't feel like they've got a hold of it. So with the Women in Transition folks, the second level, one of the things I taught them was stop waiting to feel like you want to do it, and just make a decision and do it. And even if you feel like it sucks every single day, all that suckage will get you to a degree and a goal and a living wage. And so we've got decades of Women in Transition folks. Our persistent rate after the first term, as brand new fresh into the next term, the Women in Transition completion and persistence rate is 97%, and the general college is around 21. Wow. because they're not trying to persist out of motivation, right? And I am so proud of them because they come to class in pajama pants and lay their head down on the table and they do not want to be there, but they see that being there when they don't feel like it, that those are the days they most need to show up, and that connection and support actually makes it better, right? And it's often the first time they've ever experienced that. So the second level of the program helped with that. And the third level of the program is on relationships and attachment systems. So that they, like, I didn't know this stuff when I built that class, but I knew that their connections were really disruptive for them. And I knew if the connections were difficult and chaotic, that those would derail them from continuing in school. And we did years of research, 5-year follow-ups on our students saying, what are the principal barriers to school? It was finances, childcare, and disruptive relationships. So that relationship piece, unbeknownst to me, intuitively starts talking about these pieces, because if you can't do the connection, attunement, trust stuff, I don't think you can make it through an educational program very well, right? And so, to speak further to your question, I would love to see some research conducted that looks at a control group of students who are identified as having developmental trauma and an experimental group where they are given this information, they're giving resources, that there's a little mini center on campus specifically for developmental trauma, and to track over time how quickly the control group and experimental group move through, because I think we'd find something there. Yeah.
I used to teach college success at Lane, and we used to use a Skip Downing curriculum, and we always used to do a pre-assessment. And without fail, students, in college success, as well as students who were in our Back on course, which was a modified college success for students with one foot on a banana peel, interdependence was always the thing that they scored lowest on. And so your comments about the trust issue, I think, really link into some of the very core reasons why our students are not always successful. And I used to see that in human relations at work, because they had to interact with one another and work together on a project. And that was one of the biggest humps to get over, recognizing that there are different styles, some who, just feel like they need to go it alone, other people that have difficulty setting limits and saying no, and, absorbing more of the work than maybe needed to be. Yeah. So it really resonates with my experience of some of our students.
That makes such good sense, and I am such a fan of anything related to college success, study skills, and everything. And I've always wondered why, with really motivated students that learn those principles, that just want to embrace time management, why does that still not sometimes get them where we want? And I think this is part of the answer, because they can have the best exposure to student success resources, but if they're disconnecting from themselves and those resources, all it does is make them feel worse about themselves because they know better, right? And so I would love to see like an overlay of classic student success principles that are proven over time with some exposure to this, because the students that I've shared this with, because now I'm starting to share little bits in the regular part of our program and not in the forced death march that we all did together fall term. Halfway through the term, in my fall experimental class, because I'd had these students for 3 terms or more, they said, this is too much. And these are not students that say this is too much. And I went, all right, we're not doing any more reaction papers the rest of the term. We're gonna pause and process and do a big final project together. Because all these different pieces, what we did is we paused, and since these women have known each other for a while, we started depending on each other in the classroom, which, Christine, is exactly what you're talking about. and the experience was better. So that positive resource of being able to say, oh, there are connections, there are people who are reliable that will carry their load and not let me down, is transformational. And I'm not sure how we create that in the classroom. That's why I'm so excited that we're going to have multiple conversations and collaborations on this, because I'm a big fan of group brain in the classroom and with faculty collaborating, that we all hold a piece of the puzzle and that we're brighter and smarter and more creative and flexible when we come together. Right? Anything else on this?
I have a question. I'm just wondering, when your students sign up for your course, how do they come to you? Because I think of like how our students. I'm just wondering how you end up with, and I'm curious how many women you have in your class as well, because this term we have a very small class, but students come to us from, they're referred from different parts of our community. So some come to us from the Department of Human Resources, some come from financial aids. We usually ask the students how they heard about the Lives in Transition program, and I had a woman.
Outside resources, we have our community partners that refer people to us too. So our classes are pretty diverse.
Very diverse.
Of course, we're a small community too, so we have to draw from all of that.
And men and women. We have men and women. So I'm just curious about your.
Yes, how we get people. The largest referral base is word of mouth from women who've gone through the program. Right? And sisters and friends and cousins seeing someone in their life that they love and care about change radically in 10 weeks. Right? And they look at that and they want some of that. This is the first time in 30 years we actually are not having a first level of the program because numbers are down. Numbers are down. It's the financial aid process is a little more challenging with the limitations on electives, and so some of our students in the past historically had unsuccessful initial college experiences and burned through a lot of their electives, and our credits are college transferable electives, and so they're blocked out now with the changes in federal financial aid, and so we're seeing a shift in numbers. Physicians, we have judges and attorneys referring women there, physicians, DHS, Relief Nursery, Birth to 3, all kinds of different places. But I think about 70% of it is word of mouth from other past participants. And it's really eclectic. A few terms ago, the age range in my class, it's usually classes of, I try to keep it at 28. One term it went to 38. It's a lot. And one particular term, 28 students. The youngest was a 17-year-old who already had 4 kids and had dropped out at 7th grade, right? And a 79-year-old attorney who wanted to come in community and address her sexual addiction and felt like she'd be honest with the group. Now you can imagine trying to teach to that broad base of somebody who hadn't graduated 7th grade, and there were 2 female physician assistants in there was a female doctor in there, and then there were folks who graduated high school, had been stay-at-home moms and things like that. And I just thought, oh dear Lord, this term is going to kill me, because I'm going to either bore someone or overstimulate, overwhelm somebody. And so I just had the folks on either end of the spectrum communicate with me weekly what they needed, right? Really diverse. And our program's all female still to this point.
So, I've been doing this for a long time too, and one of the things that I kind of naturally developed is that first couple of days in the program of these name games, everything to help each other get to know their names, help them to start developing connections. And so it makes so much, we kind of do it naturally, but then looking at this, the first one is that connection to others, and so that just makes so much sense that kind of evolved, that intuitive knowing that that's what needs to happen in the groups, but how well it works. Because one of the most beautiful things, like I get writings from students and they say, I have them write about their first week. And they talk almost invariably, the students will say, I cannot believe that I met these women 2 days ago and I already feel such a connection to them. And then by the second and third week, they're talking about how much they respect and hold those people. And, you know, by the end of the program, they're talking about love.
Yes.
Which, you know, and those relationships continue for so long. So I love that piece. I love seeing that in here.
It's so true because all of us, I think it's pretty safe to say, you can wave me off if I'm wrong, because I don't want to speak for everybody in here, but I know I came to education for the love of it, not for the great wealth or all of that. I knew I wanted to teach in first grade because I thought reading was amazing and it eliminated the middleman. And I thought, just teaching people to read, like now I don't need a parent. So if no one feels like it, I can pick up a book. And I became the librarian's best friend. So she'd pop the library open for me every summer and let me leave a window cracked open because I lived rurally, and I'd shimmy through the window and pack out as many books as I could and do that. And we have natural intuition about these things. And what I love about this is just what you were saying, which is we can start to identify and be even more purposeful about it. That's the impact it had on me. Yes.
Yeah, I just had an experience this last week of a student who came in to have, in the Math Learning Center, students do their math kind of an independent study, and they have modules they have to get through. And a student came in to have her homework kind of checked off and had only done 2 sections out of 8 that was due on Friday, and she was in here on Wednesday. And so she thought she was ahead. And when she found out that she was supposed to get through all 8 of these sections by Friday, she lost it and started crying and left. And then I decided I had to use the restroom, and I went to the restroom and she was crying in the stall. And so I got out and washed my hands and saying, are you okay? Are you going to be okay? And she said, no, I'm not. And then she started talking about, I can't believe what an idiot I am that I thought I could go back to college and be successful, and just like this negative self-talk that kept going on. And then, and she said, I should have asked somebody. I was kind of confused about what the requirements were, but I'm so used to I have to do it by myself. Yes. And so that...
this piece.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I really didn't know how to get through her other than I just said, please don't be hard on yourself. That's not going to help anything. And, you know, can you do 2 sections a day until Friday? If you can do 2 sections a day, come in and we'll help you as much as we can. But anyway, that was so... and I was wondering, is Kim here? Can I just walk somebody? Okay. I was just thinking it might have been more helpful to just walk them down to the counseling center.
You know, you employed so many good resources because it's places like the bathroom or the cafeteria where students who don't feel like they are deserving of our attention and help, it's kind of unexpected. And so for you to say, don't be so hard on yourself, I'm going to talk in a little bit about shame-based and pride-based identifications around that, and that whole I'm not smart enough, you know, I won't succeed. That's the tragedy of developmental trauma, because a goof up that is fixable, right, and you suggested that, feels like a sign. Developmentally traumatized people see glitches as a sign that they're not fit for college. And to be able to walk the person down to counseling, or sometimes what I'll say is, I've done that too. I've done that too. Let's chunk it up. You know, can you come with me now and let's do a part of the next module? We'll just do baby steps. I'm all about the movie All About Bob, baby steps, right? We'll do baby steps and get you there. But people do this all the time. Yeah, so you handled that beautifully.
So how did the conversations around trauma come up for you and those students? I mean, did they just disclose that to you? Was that like a whole conversation that you had?
It comes out often in their reaction papers because they'll read my life transition book and I have them write about whatever's most pertinent, because I don't know what's going to activate their trauma, and they'll write about something and they'll have them apply it to their lives either in the past or present, and that's usually where I'll get indications of trauma even if they're not identifying as trauma, and then how they'd like to use the information in the future, because I want information to be operationalized and to move them forward. And so it's a way to help them think critically and actively about, no, this isn't just factual information, how do I apply it? You know? And so I got curious about all the things I saw about lack of self-confidence, I feel invisible, I don't know if I want to be invisible, and I started taking all that stuff and kind of word mapping it out, and then I started Googling and I tripped over the developmental trauma stuff. Then I started having these conversations openly, and the relief in the room when they realized everybody else in the room had it, because of the population I work with, it normalized. And I said, we're going to figure out how to do this together. And I taught them the principle of contraction and expansion. So all living beings are constantly in flux of contraction and expansion. And if you take a single cell amoeba in a petri dish and you poke it with a pin, it'll contract. That's our response to adverse stimuli. And so in the classroom, when I feel people tense up around a topic, after I've explained expansion and contraction and that we're supposed to be in flux all the time, I'll say, oh wow, can you feel the room? So I'll get them to tune in, to do their attunement and connect. I'll say, can you feel in the room? We just contracted. This is a challenging curriculum piece. That's normal. All right, let's break it down so we can start expansion and breathing in and understanding that concept. And then when there's another glitch, I'll go, oh, there we go, you know, contracting again. And by the end of the term, they go, I'm contracting on this, Kara. Like, I need to do some expansion. And it becomes something that they can speak to and stay in connection with. Yeah. Oh, I think she's getting the person. Yeah.
And you don't have to answer this now, because I appreciate that this might be a question to be answered later. But I am curious, because you do have a professional counseling background. What kind of educational background you would prefer that an instructor of this type of course have, and what might be their disposition? Because I can immediately see that there are probably a number of skills and sort of dispositional aspects that an instructor would have to need to be able to successfully teach the curriculum.
Okay. For the Women in Transition program, when we hit the recession in 2008, I've been the only instructor of the program, and the joke is I started out with some trust survival stuff, and as I've healed, I've gone, yikes, I do everything. I change the toilet paper in the bathroom, I do my own photocopying, and for a handful of years, I had 4 part-time faculty members teaching in the program, because we were running 4 or 5 sections of the first level. And I asked that they all have a master's degree in counseling because of the relational dynamics in the classroom. The good news is, I think if each campus had someone teaching a course on relational trauma, you wouldn't necessarily need that counseling background. You would just need a little bit of training in the variables that might come up in the classroom around this stuff, and how to. There's a different kind of classroom management that goes on with developmental trauma rather than just standard classroom management. But I'm going to talk about some of those pieces later in the morning. And there's a lot you can do proactively that will head off difficulties, so then you won't need that level. Also, it's great to have the support of the counseling departments to be able to say, I'm going to present a tough topic in class. Is there any chance you could team teach with me on that day? And, you know, because I think if we share skill sets, we get the best of both worlds. Lane, like this is probably in the 80s, did an experimental class that was student success taught by one of our counselors, student success, stress management, and math. And so they taught math, and as the room started to get activated, the counselor, college success, stress reduction person would step in and do these deliberate modules, and people progressed much more thoroughly through math because of that. Because they'd stop and they'd reconnect with themselves and the material. They tune into, do they need to stand up? Do they need to drink water? Do they need to walk outside? And so I think there's a lot of collaboration we can do and combine people's skill sets to get really exciting outcomes. You had another question?
Oh, I was just, because I also noticed you have to wait. I also, one of the first things I noticed was that there were 2 men in the room, and that's so unfortunate. And so my question to you was, are you in the future planning to do a class or your program as a co-ed model? Because the conversations that happen in our classrooms are very different when it's just women, because sometimes they are just women, and then at other times we have men in there as well, and it really changes the conversation in a positive way, you know. And so I'm just wondering if
we've chosen to keep it all female because of the powerful results we get in terms of completion. We used to run a 1-week reentry workshop that was a precursor to people being in the program, and we would have those be co-ed, and when they were co-ed, the number of women that persisted into our actual program dropped by 70%. Because they were quiet, you know, a lot of the dynamics that happen in co-ed classes, they didn't speak up as much. What I do want to do, though, is before I retire, I want to build a men in transition program, because I think it would be incredibly powerful to have men together just as men, and then have some crossover interplay at the 2nd and 3rd levels. I think that could be just really exciting. Because I think there is something with the co-ed piece that's really exceptional.
and we have small groups, so it makes a difference.
Yeah, I don't know that I could do classroom management of 38 co-ed people with this material. I think my brain would pop and stuff. You know what it's like to work a classroom and try to keep things going. Yes?
Any possibility we can bring back the Veterans in Transition program?
I would love that, especially with our increasing number of female vets.
At Lane, we currently have just under 400 veteran students receiving educational benefits. Many of our students have a difficulty with the learning environment. The standing behind you and when you stop, that's very difficult for our students. So I think if there were classes similar to this that would be available to our veterans, they would definitely thrive. And it would definitely, with the recession, as far as our veterans are there's less deployments happening right now, so a lot of our veterans that are coming back from deployments are unsure of their next direction.
Yes.
They've lost who they are as a person, and these classes would definitely benefit them.
Stacy, we should talk when we get back on campus.
Yes, we should.
Yes, we should. Yeah, all these collaborations that can happen. Shall we continue on? We've got about 20 minutes before we take a break at 10:45. This is such good sharing and insights. It was what I was hoping for. Okay. So our previous 2 slides, where we saw the development of the core capacities when things go right, is the upper 2 lines, and the second slide we saw when things don't go well and survival styles form. This is the process. So we can look at this as it pertains to someone growing up, and we can also think about it as it relates to what we might want to do in the classroom. So when things go well and core capacities, those 5 biological core capacities occur, what happens is the child has some core needs, right, for connection, attunement, trust, autonomy, love, sexuality. And you get attuned caregivers that are plugged in and receptive and responsive. The core capacities develop, and in particular, you get a capacity for connection, aliveness, and creativity. And doesn't that sum up some of the variables that would allow students to be successful in higher ed? If you can connect, feel a sense of aliveness and creativity, you can engage. You can be an engaged learner. Conversely, when core needs aren't met and there are caregiver failures, you get disconnection, compromised core capacity, and the adaptive survival style. And part of what comes out of that then is the core capacity for aliveness, connection, and creativity is compromised, and therefore their learning ability is compromised. And that's how they show up in our classroom. All right, this is the chart that made my students not love me for about 2 weeks. I didn't make it, but we went over it. And there's a lot on it, and I want to give you the general sense of it. And if you've got questions or thoughts on this, feel free to email me or give me a phone call for clarification, because we spent a lot of time on this, looking at it, and we're not going to spend that amount of time today. So you can read this model bottom up or top down, and bottom up is how disruption and dysregulation in the central nervous system happens. So bottom up is how stuff goes wrong, 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 incredibly wrong. And top down is how you can intervene and create growth and healing and get back down to where we'd ideally like folks to be. Okay? You'll see the adaptive survival styles in the center, in those darker squares. So capacity for connection, compromised capacity, compromised attunement, compromised trust, autonomy, love, sexuality. And then down here, where we've got things in the healthy spot, freedom from identifications. And we're going to go over identifications, shame-based and pride-based identification, expansion, aliveness, and self-expression. Right? Pretty wonderful. Then look in the right-hand column, you'll see shock trauma, and the left-hand column you'll see developmental trauma. And they have some characteristics in common. And as I read my way through the literature, one of the things that was challenging was there's a blending of the two, and there's even some similarity in how some of the symptoms manifest, but what they each need for growth and healing is significantly different. It's things as basic as, for folks in shock trauma, one of the things that's often helpful is to tell them to take deep breaths, right? And that assists. With somebody in developmental trauma, that's the worst thing you can do, because it will actually cause them to disconnect further from themselves. Or via the mechanism of they take these deep breaths, they feel more of a connection, which is what you want for your shock trauma folks. But when you're trying to disconnect and you feel more connection, you can actually stimulate a panic attack by telling somebody to take a few deep breaths. What you want with developmental trauma is to tell people to take slow breaths, which is different than deep. And I've been a psychologist since 1985, and I did not know that, right? I get a little eye twitch just thinking about how many times I told people to take deep breaths, and it was not helpful. Okay. So this first section here, the healthy differentiation of the life force, what you see with shock trauma folks is survival energies of fight, flight as they perceive the threat. And if they're able to discharge the physical impulses and the chemicals in their body when they sense a threat. So I like watching animal movies or animal shows, and when the gazelle barely gets away from the lion, you'll see the gazelle like shake it off and do that. That's a completed fight-flight response, because they're able to discharge that energy. And it needs to be discharged physically. But when shock trauma occurs and someone isn't able to do fight-flight, isn't able to release that, you have an incomplete fight-flight response, and that trauma stays inside and manifests as PTSD. And you get high activation. We've seen that in our students. Panic, anger outbursts, hypervigilant, anxiety. What I've done with some shock trauma folks, and that's not my specialty, is I've taught them how to do the gazelle thing. So if they're in class and they're feeling activated, part of what they need to do is actually physically get that out of their body. So I've taught them to go into the bathroom stall or in the back part of campus because we're up against the country, and literally do that with each of their 4 limbs. Alternate and maybe cycle through it 3 times. And many folks have said, oh my gosh, it felt like something left my body for a little bit. Simple. I do that when, you know, I'm at the DMV and it's taking a long time because I have no shame in public. So I'll start doing this and people just be going, what's going on? I'm at the DMV, I'm having a seizure. You know, it's all right. It's 3 hours of my life. Okay. This, you'll see over here it says sympathetically dominant symptoms. The sympathetic nervous system is designed to get ready for intense activity. It's the accelerator. So it's designed to flood you with hormones and give you the ability to do fight or flight. So it gets activated at the front part of the disruption. As it pertains to developmental trauma, that part of the nervous system gets activated with chronically unmet needs, neglect, and abuse, all right? And then there's anger, rage, and one of the things I learned about developmental trauma is that there is healthy aggression that's supposed to occur when your environment fails you. And as somebody, you know, who's just about 60 years old, I was trained that girls don't have anger. And so I read that line over and over again, that healthy aggression is the appropriate response to when the environment fails you. So I tell my students that if we're in the classroom setting and something I'm doing is not environmentally supporting you, it's okay for you to feel irritable. I'd prefer you don't go to anger and rage. Let's like take care of it up front. But if you're not happy with me, that's actually good. That's a piece of healthy assertion of life force. We all know what, you know, a newborn baby is like. They have healthy assertion of life force at 2 a.m. when everyone's sleep deprived and they've got a wet diaper and they want to be fed. Part way up in the sympathetically dominant symptoms, the developmental trauma person will feel the threat of attachment loss, and that's a distinction between developmental and shock trauma, because part of what occurs for people in developmental trauma is if they stay as a kid in the chronically unmet needs and their anger and rage, their healthy anger and rage is continually activated, it's perceived in the child as a threat to the attachment connection, that they cannot stay that angry and rageful without risking breaking the connection apart. So part of what happens is they have to split off from that. They have to put that part of themselves aside in the background as though it doesn't exist, and they lose a lot of the ability to fight for what they need and for what they want and to even know what that is. That's the splitting and projection. So they split off from the healthy aggression and they project aggression onto other people. You're mad at me, you don't like me, you know, you're gonna hurt me. And then you get either with them either acting out, which we all know what that looks like, and you can get some of that from the shock trauma folks as well, but then you get the acting in piece, the self-hatred and toxic guilt. And when you spoke about the math student, you were seeing some of that acting in, some of that, you know, focused on the self. You'll see when we get to parasympathetically dominant symptoms, that's the reverse of the sympathetic nervous system, which is it's the brakes. It's designed to slow everything down. It's designed, even to a certain extent, to have people numb out, disassociate, because you can't sustain that sympathetically dominant nervous system because your system won't tolerate it. So that's when you'll see low energy, fatigue, disconnection, the glaze over in the classroom. On the shock trauma side, you'll see disassociation, which gets a bad name, but it allows people to stay on the planet in the face of unbearable experiences and to continue to be here. You'll see social isolation in your shock trauma folks, lots of physical symptoms, helplessness, collapse, and actually hypovigilance, a lack of being vigilant. And sometimes we don't think of our shock trauma people that way because we experience them so much here where they're hypervigilant. But if this persists long enough, they actually unplug from everything and don't want to take in perceived threat because it becomes too exhausting and too unbearable. On the developmental trauma side, you'll see the same freeze, and then look at our list. Dissociation as well, social isolation, physical symptoms, helpless collapse, chronic fear, and toxic shame. Chronic fear and toxic shame is this deadly cocktail. Because if you're afraid, but you don't have toxic shame, you can ask for resources and help. You can ask for reassurance. But if you've got the toxic shame, there's this belief that I feel bad, therefore I'm bad. In developmental trauma, when little kids feel bad, they're not saying what in my environment is creating this me feeling bad. When they feel bad, they make the identification that they are bad. And they carry that into adulthood. And so everything that doesn't work out, missing the modules in the math thing, it's like, you know, oh, wow, I made a bad student decision. Next time I should check it out and proceed forward. With a toxic shame in there, it's not, oh, I made a bad decision that I learned from, not checking it out. I made a bad decision because I'm bad and I don't belong. Right? And it's hard, as you experience, to try to intervene in that. Yes.
I would like to see a bumper sticker that instead of says wag more, bark less, it should say wag more, tuck tail less, or tuck less.
Right? Right? Wouldn't that be great? I love a good bumper sticker. Right? Yeah.
So in that situation, how do you grade if there's assignments that are due? At some point, how do you handle their emotions, but the reality is I can't pass you for this class, you haven't done the work.
Right? That's such a dilemma. I have the luxury in my program, especially having 3 levels of it, I have the option of taking 2 terms to get them to that place. And so I got very friendly with the State Board of Curriculum. They were my best buddies for a long time because I explained to them in these classes they needed to be pass, no pass classes so that students had the ability to get a C- and not have that affect their GPA. And I am sort of the velvet bulldozer of completion, which is I will work with people individually so that they are at least doing a passing grade. And I also was able to get agreement that I could do an A grade option for students who wanted the challenge of pursuing an A grade, and they did additional work. And so in those 2 terms, a lot of what I did with the students is say, all right, you need to, in our advanced levels, type and format your paper, because a lot of them had not had those experiences. And I would say to students very gently, if you were in a different class, this wouldn't be passing work. And I'm the person you're supposed to practice on, so don't, you know, I didn't know how to do this either when I came to college, and so part of my job is to get you ready for standard classes. And so they have a chance to fill in that gap and figure out and learn from other students and say, oh, you did it this way, oh, that's a good idea, how'd you figure it out? Because it's not just having the curriculum, they need to have the experience of how do you get to that place. So the first term, they have a 1-week grace rule that they can get any assignment into me a week late. But I said, by the end of the term, you need to be getting the things in on time, and there's a finite deadline. And then in preceding terms with me, or terms after that with me, there are no late papers. They're due either emailed to me or in my hand by the end of class, and they bump up against that, but because they have this safe experience with me, I tell them, I'm on your side. This is the place for you to figure out that struggle. And then there's a lot of the toxic shame and fear of, I can't do this, and what's this about? And we work through that as part of the curriculum to get them ready for other classes. And at Lane, for many years, the Women in Transition program of all of the other academic departments on campus has more 4-point presidential scholars from all these women who think they can't. Because when they figure out they can, after decades of not being able to, they have so much go power, I just go, man, I wish I could tap into that tank. Because they're ready to succeed. So a lot of information on this, okay? And I want you to have more the feel of it than the full awareness of it. And you'll see as we go through each of the adaptive survival styles, you'll see kind of how the two overlay. Because when I first looked at this chart, I just went, oh, this is so confusing, I don't get it, right? So let's see where we're at now. Oh, this is a good thing to do before break. Shame-based identifications and pride-based counter-identifications. So we're talking about survival styles, not the cool, well-balanced core capacities. In connection, and we're all going to recognize our students in both categories. Shame at existing, feeling like a burden, feeling of not belonging. I had a student spring term that she would apologize to me every time she tried to ask me a question on break. And it was painful. She'd go, I'm so sorry, I know you're busy, I know you have a lot. And it was exhausting trying to contain and settle down that shame, right? And some of our students, you know, are exhausting because of that, because we sort of have to be the emotional kidney dialysis co-regulation of all that anxiety to get them settled down enough to be able to ask their question. Conversely, the pride-based for connection is pride in being a loner, pride in not needing others, pride in not being emotional. And folks move from shame-based into pride-based as a way to take their survival style and try to turn it into a virtue. And we can see students flip-flop, you know, from moment to moment between those two. The piece about pride-based stuff is the more energy a person puts into staying in pride-based, the deeper their shame becomes. So if somebody's successful at this, when something activates them and they get kicked back into the shame-based one, it's like they plummet. So I would actually rather see a student mostly doing shame-based stuff because you can start to shore that up and give them other experiences. And sometimes when somebody's in a shame-based identification in the classroom, I'll point that out and I'll say, it's hard to feel good about this, isn't it? And I'll say, how many other folks in the room feel this way? And because we build trust really quickly in this class, you know, it's usually 75% or more raise their hands, and I'll have the student turn around and I'll say, look at all your peeps, you're in the right place. And then that shame starts to get dispersed because here are all these other lovely women that care about each other, and the person's saying, well, so-and-so's amazing and incredible and has got all these great attributes, and she feels the same way I do, maybe I have some great attributes too. And they start seeing the goodness and positivity in each other, and then one woman will say to the other, well, I see that in you, you have that too. And they start to collectively elevate each other out of those shame-based identifications. Attunement, shame-based identification is I'm needy, I'm unfulfilled, I'm empty, and I'm undeserving. One of my favorite phrases is you're only as needy as your unmet needs. Because if your needs get met, you're not needy. And some of our students have such a history of unmet needs, it feels like that's a very deep hole. But as those needs start to get met, that neediness goes down. The pride-based counter-identification, caretaker, pride in being the shoulder everyone cries on, makes themselves indispensable and needed, pride in not having needs. This is also the area where you'll see a student that looks super competent, who's busy staying after class helping people. And part of what happens is you'll look at the student and say, I don't have to worry about this person. They've got their stuff, they're helping other students. You may be looking at somebody in pride-based identification, right? You may be looking at somebody super confident, but you don't know for a while. And if that student kicks back into the shame-based identification and you don't know what's going on, now you have a piece to be able to say, I saw how much you gave to your fellow students, and that was so beautiful. Now you deserve some support and attention from me. Trust, shame-based identification, small, powerless, used, betrayed. This is lovely in the classroom where if you deviate off your syllabus, it becomes an act of betrayal. So I say hug that syllabus and ride that syllabus over the finish line and don't deviate, because you can kick up trust stuff with lack of consistency, with unclear assignments. The pride-based counter-identification, strong and in control, successful, larger than life, user, betrayer. This is the person that I've experienced in the classroom that will create, or attempt to create, because I don't let them do this, a scapegoating, pull the pin on the grenade, blow up the safety of the classroom dynamic, because it doesn't feel safe to them, so why not make it unsafe for everybody else? And those folks are really tough. I get one of those every once in a while, and I just think, okay, please help me know how to cocoon this. Autonomy, angry, resentful of authority, rebellious, enjoys disappointing others. Isn't that interesting, right? Not, you know, I've had students say, I flunk every class, I'm gonna flunk your class, you know, so just don't expect me to pass. And I say, thank you so much for letting me know where you're at, because I am going to hovercraft and make you pass, because that's why I'm here, right? And then they get more rebellious. I go, good, let's have a struggle. Let's see. The pride base is nice, sweet, compliant, good girl, good boy. Fear of disappointing others. This is the student that will come up to me in the first level when there's a week grace period, and she won't have her paper done on the initial first due date, and she'll go, I'm so sorry, I feel just so, you know, like she's let me down by not having, like it's a personal affront, right? Love sexuality, the shame-based hurt, rejected, physically flawed, unloved, and unlovable. This doesn't so much pertain to our educational environment, but I think it's good to see the whole picture. Rejects first, perfect, does not allow for mistakes, is seamless, seeming to have everything together.